Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to, this will be the last class of the winter semester. We'll be back after Passover. Just a few announcements that you have flyers in front of you. If you're interested in the first night of Passover, joining us for a community Passover Seder, it's filling up fast, so do make your reservations now. Just go to chabadconejo.com or chabadconejo.com/Seder, either way, or call the office. Also, after we start our spring semester, there'll be a lecture on May 13th that I'll be giving. And the name of the talk is the Game of Life Rigged? The Power of Free Will. You're all invited to join us for that lecture. When we talk about the concept of a chosen people, which is what we've been talking about here for the past few years, it makes some people, including some Jews, very uncomfortable. But I have maintained from the beginning when we started our focus, especially if we see it as it comes through the book of Deuteronomy, that this discomfort comes from an ignorance of truly understanding what chosen people means. And if we had a better grasp of what it means, we wouldn't be as uncomfortable. In fact, we would be proud of it. One of the national conversations that have been going on the last few years in our country revolves around the idea of privilege. Some people quite obviously more privileged than others, and it's been cooking up resentments out there, leading many people in different circles to kind of apologize for their privilege. But is privilege in itself a negative thing? Is it a dirty word? Is it a badge of dishonor from which one should hide their face in shame? What does it mean to be privileged? So let me start with that. I think it is important for each and every one of us to appreciate the privileges that we're fortunate to have. And I think it's important for that awareness to lead to becoming more sensitive and more caring, and more compassionate for those that are not as blessed. So when we say count your blessings, well, there needs to be a phase 2 to that. Count your blessings, appreciate those blessings, and then utilize it to help those that don't have those blessings. I don't believe that as a rule one should apologize for privilege, or feel guilty about it or ashamed of it. On the contrary, privilege is exactly that. It's a privilege. It's good to be blessed. But at the same time, one should know that what's more important is, are you worthy of the privileges? Are you living up to it? Which brings to the question on the table today, are Jews privileged? It's a fear. Is it fear, and is it accurate to identify the Jewish people as a privileged people? And I think the answer that we're getting from the Torah, from the discussion of a chosen people, is yes, we are privileged. And I don't think we should apologize for being privileged in this way. I think we should be very proud of it. But we also need to understand it. Because at first glance, that sounded quite arrogant. We're privileged and we're proud. Well, what is it that we're privileged in what way? And what is it that we're proud of? So generally, when we hear this term privileged, what comes to mind? It's usually things about special treatment, that you have a leg up, that you have unique access to opportunities, that you have this special entree to institutions and to positions of influence. It often means that you get special perks and special breaks, that people cut you slack. They give you the benefit of the doubt, the assumption of innocence. People of privilege can usually feel extra protected. They feel safe, they feel secure because they're privileged. So if we took those definitions and we asked the same question, are Jews privileged, we would get a very different answer. Access and opportunity. You don't have to go back to pre-war Germany or Hungary to find discrimination. quotas being imposed upon Jews. In 1935, the dean at Yale University instructed his admissions committee never admit more than 5 Jews. You were one of the 5? Harvard's president at the time wrote that too many Jewish students would ruin the college. As recently as the 1970s, Jews and blacks in America were denied entry into all sorts of clubs and associations. There were signs in our country, no dogs, no coloreds, no Jews. Groucho Marx found humor in the hate, famously saying that he wouldn't join a club that would have him as a member anyway. And then one day he was told that he would be admitted into an exclusive Gentile club only if he didn't swim in the pool. So Groucho asked if his daughter, who he said was half Jewish, could wade in the pool up to her knees. Now, we know there's no such thing as a half Jew, but it's still funny. So, special access for Jews? We didn't have that privilege. Benefit of the doubt, assumption of innocence. I think we're all too familiar with the preposterous libels, with the scandals, with conspiracies that have been leveled against the Jews through all ages. And you don't have to go back hundreds of years either. You can still find on Amazon today books that talk about Jewish blood libels. This invention of using blood of Christians for matzah. After an earthquake struck Haiti in the year 2010, Israel was one of the first to send in aid and staff, and they set up the largest delegation of aid. They established a fully functioning hospital on the island. First country in the world to do it. A member of Britain's House of Lords demanded that an inquiry be set up for Israel to answer accusations, and she was the only one making the accusation, that Israeli doctors were working in Haiti only so that they could harvest the organs of local residents. This comes right out of the old-fashioned blood libel. According to FBI data, Jews were more than twice as likely to be the victim of hate crimes than any other minority group in this country. That was before October the 7th. How many college campuses were flooded with anti-Israel, anti-Jewish rhetoric and propaganda while drowning out any voices that want to counter such attacks? All of them. And if any one of us wanted to believe that this was all something of the past, we saw post-October 7th how it's still there. This firestorm of anti-Semitism that broke out throughout this country and throughout the world with protests that still go on right now, tearing down of posters of hostages that have been held now for 180 days, and they're still ripping them down. And the anti-Semitism that we see on social media. I can go on that subject, but that's not what I'm talking about today. The only point I'm trying to make here is that by the classic definition of privilege, which is access and acceptance and safety and security, the Jewish people are probably amongst the least privileged people on the planet. Certainly in the context of history, but even in more recent times. So if that's the case, what do I mean with the premise that I opened up with, that Jews are privileged and we should be proud of it? Where is the privilege? So I will give you the Torah definition of privilege as we get from the book of Deuteronomy that we have been studying. True privilege is not about how others think of you, or even how others treat you. It's about how you think of yourself and how you treat others. True privilege is not about what someone else does or does not do for you. It's about what you do with what you have. And our sages tell us that God wanted to give the Jewish people, quote unquote, merit. So what did he do? He gave us the Torah and mitzvahs in abundance. God wanted us to be privileged. So he entrusted us with the responsibility of living a virtuous and righteous life so that we may elevate and transform his world according to this vision. That's privilege. So, no, Jewish privilege doesn't usually mean special access or opportunity or favors. It does mean that we're called upon by God to set an example of living a meaningful life, of repairing the world in God's image, and of being of service to others. It means rising above how others may treat us, to treat all human beings with dignity, with compassion, and with honor. That's being privileged. Some 50 years ago, a Torah scholar by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Hunter was the featured speaker at a national convention of Jewish educators. In his remarks, he told this gathering of esteemed principals and teachers from Jewish schools around the entire country that he can summarize their entire task in 5 Hebrew words. This is all you really need to work on and accomplish. And the 5 words are from the blessing that we recite in front of the Torah when we're called up for an aliyah. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, who has chosen us from among all the nations. We're called upon to be exceptional. We're challenged to be exceptional. And this is what he said to them: your job is to inspire the Jewish future to truly understand the meaning of these words that they say when they're called up to the Torah. What does it mean, Asher bachar ban? It's not just a phrase to study for your bar mitzvah. It's the phrase that should guide you through your life. What does it mean to be chosen? Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. And how do you live up to that? Privilege doesn't mean superior. Privilege means to have greater responsibilities. It is not meant for us to hoist ourselves up on a pedestal, but to feel humbly obligated to live more ethically, to act more charitably, and to proclaim our faith more proudly, without any shame, without any embarrassment. To be proud. Notwithstanding the challenges of the prejudice and the discrimination, the fact is that most Jewish communities in the 21st century are blessed, more blessed than perhaps at any time going back to the days of King Solomon, with material wealth, with privileges the likes of which our ancestors could never have dreamed of enjoying. What are we doing with that? How are we utilizing the freedom, the times that we are in, to further advance the responsibility that were placed on our shoulders back at Sinai? In the year 2019, Israel's women's lacrosse team competed in the World Championship in Peterborough, Canada. And in their playoff game against Kenya's national team, Israel won 13-4. Now, 13-4 would mean a great celebration. You didn't just win, you won. But the Israeli players left the game very upset and very disturbed. Why? Because they came off the field saying that was an unfair advantage we had. They admitted themselves, it wasn't a fair game. Because the Israeli players wore modern cleats. They had shoes that were designed for this game. And the Kenyan opponents didn't have that. They didn't have the money for it. So they wore whatever shoes they had. And it was a wet field. So it was muddy. And these players were flying all over the place because they couldn't balance in the mud. And the Israeli players recognized that this is not fair. We're playing against people that can't run on this type of field. After the game, some of the Israeli players called their parents to express how badly they felt about really winning this game at that type of margin, and how unfair it is that one team can have the cleats and the sneakers, and the other ones came with whatever shoes they had. One of the players' father, his name was Michael Davini, he ran a pet ortho clinic. That was his career. And he expressed concern that it's not just about that game, it's these people are going to ruin their feet forever if they play on such fields going at the speed that they're trying to go without having the proper shoes. So that night he called the team's coaches, he called committee members, and he called some of the other parents. And overnight, they organized this collection amongst the parents of the Israeli players to buy new shoes for the Kenya team. So they asked the Kenyan coach for a list of each player and their shoe size, but he needed to keep it quiet. He supplied the list. Now, it wasn't easy to find custom shoes overnight on such short notice, but they went to work and they found a specialty store willing to stay open late in Canada to, in fact, fill this order of shoes. It was shipped immediately, hand-delivered, brought to the Israeli team. And before the next day's game, the Israeli team asked their Kenyan team friends, they wanted to get together, they wanted to meet. And they surprised the Kenyans by each member of the Israeli team presenting a pair of cleats to a member of the Kenyan team. It was an emotional moment, with the Israeli and the Kenyan players hugging each other and crying together. The Israelis didn't look for any publicity, but the Kenyan lacrosse team, their official website, posted a picture of this and a little write-up on Twitter. Their regular Twitter followers, they have like maybe 80 followers, but somehow that spread and it went viral and millions of people took notice and saw what a group of Israeli girls did, what they accomplished from the bottom of their heart to their competitors. But they wanted the Kenyan players to have what they needed to have. Wearing their new cleats, by the way, Kenya went on to win their next game. They beat Belgium 16-9. And they tweeted, one game in cleats today equals one win. And one of the players added, no one can help everyone, but everyone can help someone. The Israeli goalie, she said a great line. She said, this is what I will remember 20 years from now. Not the adventures of the world competition, but the expression of love and kindness. That will stay with me forever. The great sage Hillel said, in a place where there are no leaders, strive to be a leader. That's the challenge to the Jewish people. If you see an injustice, do something. You can say it's an injustice, you can complain about it, you can tweet about it, you can put comments on WhatsApp about it. Are you going to do anything about it? That's the privilege that we have been given, this responsibility that we have been given, to find the voids and fix the voids. Tikkun olam, fix this world, because it needs a lot of fixing. Paul Cohen is a friend of mine. He's a sports agent who lives in the Valley, and he represents many professional baseball players. You guys know Paul very well. He's also an observant Jew. And he tells a story how a few years ago, one of his clients was a star pitcher by the name of those of you that are baseball fans. Tim Hudson was one of his clients. And Tim Hudson became a free agent. And become a free agent in baseball, that's big payday, not just for the player, but it's a big day for the agent as well, because you get a nice commission on that, a nice percentage of it. And so you always wait for that free agent year, because that's when you're going to really cash in. Now, Tim Hudson was he's an over 200 win player, so he's quite a find. Many teams are interested and they're negotiating with Paul, sending in offers to Paul. They want him to sign with their team. The signing date is approaching. A lot of free agency takes place in the winter time. That's when the free agency baseball season just started. It starts the end of March, beginning of April, but the free agency is open during the months of January. In January, Friday is short. Shabbat starts early. Keep that in mind for the rest of the story. So it's now a Friday afternoon. Negotiations are coming down to the wire. Candle lighting time was about 4:30. Two of the general managers involved in the talks knew that Paul was an observant Jew, but the other two did not. Originally there were 15 teams interested. They narrowed it down to 4 teams. On the 3:30 conference call, Paul gives them all a heads up. And he says, gentlemen, at 4 p.m., we're wrapping up negotiations. Because at 4:30, the Sabbath begins, and I need a few minutes to shower, get ready for the Sabbath, and go off to shul. So this is coming to the end. It's 3:30 now. At 4 o'clock, game is over. I'm picking the team. So final offers got to come in right now, and you'll be notified before the Sabbath who Tim Hudson's going to sign with. So they all refined their offers. They all got the offers in. It's 3:58. Paul calls Bob Evans. Bob Evans is the general manager of the San Francisco Giants. And he says, Bobby, the Giants got it. We got a deal. It's going to be the Giants. The offer you made is accepted. We'll work out the actual paperwork after the Sabbath ends, but between us, you're the guy. I'm calling the other 3 general managers to tell them that they didn't get him, but I'm not going to tell them who did until the contract is signed, and we'll do that Saturday night. So Bob Evans says, thanks for the great news. I'm all excited about it. It's wonderful. It's going to be great having him on our team. But I don't like this idea of we'll wait till tomorrow night to actually sign the contract. Why don't we do it now? Now, I understand you told me about the Sabbath thing, so I'll send a messenger over to your house with the document so you can sign. He says, no, you don't understand. I can't sign either. So I'll email it. No, I can't do that either. He's trying to explain. Bob Evans doesn't quite understand. What does this mean, you're Sabbath observant? I get we won't talk on the phone anymore, but we can do this some other way. And he says, Bob, you can trust me. My word is my word. The Giants have him. We'll take care of everything Saturday night. We'll finalize it in signing, and we'll go public Sunday morning. And that's what happened. And Tim Hudson signed Saturday night. He signed a deal with the San Francisco Giants. Okay, let's fast forward 2 years. Tim Hudson is now retiring. It's his last game. They're playing in San Francisco. They happen to be playing the Dodgers, like they happen to be doing this week. Paul Cohn flew into San Francisco to be there for his player's last game, to watch his final appearance on the mound, and they were invited to watch it from the owner's suite. The owner of the Giants is someone named Larry Baer. During the game, Larry Baer goes over to Paul and says, can I have 5 minutes of your time? So, of course. He says, do you remember when we did the Hudson deal 2 years ago? He says, of course I remember. He says, Bob Evans called me and told me this whole cutoff thing. He called me at 3:30 after he got off the phone, and he said, we got to come up with our best offer, and it has to be by 4 o'clock because the Sabbath is starting at 4:30, and Ball keeps the Sabbath, and we have to do it in the next 30 minutes. I called my wife first. This is what he's telling Paul Cohn 2 years later. And I said, Pamela, we haven't had a Shabbat dinner with our kids for as long as I can remember. Tell the kids I want them all coming over tonight to the house. I want them to drop their cell phones off at the door. No cell phones during the Shabbat dinner. And we're going to have a first Shabbat dinner in decades, together as a family. And you know what, Paul? Because of you, because of your call to our general manager about the Shabbat thing, it inspired us to have a beautiful Shabbat dinner. And we continue doing that every once in a while. We do that now. And I wanted to thank you in person, because you made it happen by driving Evans crazy about Shabbat and the time and this and what you could do, what you can't do. And Paul Cohn was very touched, very touched. 6th inning comes, the owner comes back. Larry Baer says, Paul, can you talk to my wife for a few minutes? She wants to talk to you too. Of course. And Pamela Baer walks over after exchanging pleasantries. She says, do you remember the Hudson contract? He says, yeah, I remember the Hudson contract. She says, I remember it very well. And I want to personally thank you. You see, a few years before that, my father had passed away. And no one ever said Kaddish for him. We never marked his yahrzeit. We never lit a candle. But after hearing from my husband about your exchange with Bob Evans and Shabbos and us having that Shabbos dinner with our kids, I decided I have to fix that. And my resolution then, that I made right then, is that I would never allow a yahrzeit of my father to pass without making sure that Kaddish was said for him and that we lit the candle. And I wanted to thank you for that. Simple story. But one Jew just doing what we're supposed to do inspires another, that inspires another, that inspires another. Wherever we go, whatever we do, when we allow our values and ideals, when we don't hide them, but we're proud of them, it inspires others. Others are touched by it, and others will take action. So when we hear people saying, check your privilege, which I think people use that expression to kind of be embarrassed that there are some privileges that we have. I say for us Jewish people, check your privilege, which means look into it, act upon it, be proud of it, but understand it. Understand what it means to be part of the Jewish people. There's a very powerful statement that we say in our prayers. We say it on Mondays and Thursdays. We talk about the trials and tribulations that we've endured throughout the millennia. And we say, Uvechol zos. And even though we've been through all of those, Shimcha lo shachachnu, despite everything we have gone through, we have not forgotten your name. And we say this to God. We've been through a lot as a people, as a nation. We've suffered a great deal. We continue to suffer. And yet we haven't forgotten your name. We're still here praying to you. We didn't abandon you. We didn't walk away from you. We didn't walk away from the mission. Despite it all, we haven't walked away. Someone named Joseph Friedenson was a Holocaust survivor, a lecturer, he's a writer, he's an editor. One of the stories he would often tell occurred when he and his fellow inmate in the camps, with a young man named Avi Ezri, they were given the garbage detail in one of the concentration camps. And they had to collect the garbage and bring it to the main dump. The dump where they would bring it to was near the women's barracks. So one day they're doing their work and they see this teenage girl. And she starts crying out to them from behind the fence of the women's camp. It sounded like she was saying, "Sveter, sveter." And they figured she must be freezing and she needs a sweater. And this poor girl doesn't have anyone to turn to, so she sees two Jewish men on the other side of the fence, and she's crying to them, "Sveter, I need a sweater." How are we going to get a sweater in the concentration camp? But we were so touched by this girl's cry that we found a way, and we were able to go ahead and we saved some food up and we traded it for a sweater. And the next time we went there, we looked to see if this girl was there. When we found her, we showed her the sweater, and she gave us this bewildered look. We said, "Sweater, you wanted a sweater?" She said, "Not sweater, siddur, siddur." She wanted a siddur. She wanted a prayer book. That's what she wanted. And this rabbi who became this editor and speaker says that the story always stayed with him. And he tried to think of it from God's perspective. Jewish girl in a concentration camp. And yes, it's freezing, but she wasn't interested in a sweater. She wanted a prayer book so that she can pray to God, even though we felt abandoned by God. But we never forgot God. That's the Jewish people. This is whom God chose from among the nations. As King Solomon writes in the Song of Songs, Mayim Rabim lo yuchlu lechabes es ava, many mighty waters can't extinguish the fire of this love. Through fire and through hell, through invasions and through dispersions, through pogroms and through persecutions, through everything the world threw at us, this bond of love that ties God to the Jewish people remains one of the most invincible, unbreakable, and unshakable forces on earth. There was a survivor who passed away just 2-3 years ago at the age of 94. And during the Shiva, his children and his grandchildren, they shared an amazing story about him, or more accurately, a story about his mother. And the story sent chills down the spines of those that were hearing it for the first time. It's a hard story to hear. I prepare you for that. He and his mother were on the train, the cattle car, to Auschwitz together. They arrived at the platform and they were forced down to the selection line. The person on the head of the selection line was Dr. Mengele. We now know what that line meant. You got a finger to one side, you lived. You got a finger to the other side, you died then. You were sent right away to the gas chambers. Mother and son are in line together. Mengele sees the woman. She looked much older than her years, and Mengele immediately sends her to the left. That's the line to the gas chambers. the line to the crematoriums. Her son looked strong. He was sent to the right. That meant he's being sent to work detail. The boy, however, couldn't bear to be separated from his mother. So he ran to the other line to be with his mother. She understood what this line meant. And she says to her son, no, go back to the line that you were sent. Go there. He says, I'm not leaving you. She says, you have to go back to that line. He says, no, Mom, I'm not. And she says, you have to listen to me. Go back to that line. Listen to your mother. Listen to your mother. Go back on that line. He says, I'm not. I'm not leaving you. What do you do at that moment? What do you do? Your son loves you. Your son is saying, Mom, I can't live without you. I can't go on without you. I'm not letting you stay here alone. I'm not going to be alone in this world. I'm going to be with you. Wherever you go, I will go. Your fate is my fate. The mother understands, however, I'm not going to survive, but he's young. He's got a life. He has a future. He could make it. He could survive, but he's not listening to me. And you have precious seconds. You don't have much time to think. And here's the painful part of the story, but the love of the story. She slapped her son in the face and said, you will listen to me. I'm your mother. Now go over there. And that was the last time he saw his mother. He went to the other line and he survived, and he lived 94 years. He never forgot the love of his mother and that slap in the face. And he often reflected about it, the pain that she must have felt at that time. This was her kiss goodbye to her son. She understood this, but she also knew the kiss was not going to get him to cross back to the line. The only way was to be stern and to be the mom and say, you will listen to your mother. To set aside one's personal hesitations and difficulties to do what is ultimately best for one child was the height of her love at that time. I tell you this story because sometimes we wonder, if God loves us so much, why are we often smacked so harshly? Years ago at a Farbrengen, a Hasidic gathering, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was addressing the subject of human suffering. I remember sitting at this Farbrengen. I remember being there. I was a young kid. And the Rebbe started to choke up, and he was crying in public in front of thousands of people. And he said, if God can do it all, if God is infinite and can do it all, why not just provide the goodness and the sweetness without the pain? And if the Torah has all the answers, why doesn't it give us the answer to the question of why the suffering? Moses pleads with God to understand, why so much pain? Why are the Jews being beaten by the Egyptians? Why do you let this happen? He pleads with God for an understanding, for an answer. The Torah never answers the question for us. And it leaves us with this question. There can only be one explanation, said the Rebbe through his tears. God doesn't want us to know. Because if we knew the reasons, we would become okay with the status quo. We would make peace with it. We would go on with our lives being just fine with the world staying exactly the way it is, because we would say, there's a reason for this. God doesn't want us to accept things the way they are. God wants us to hope and to pray and to protest and to yearn for the better. And he wants us to be his partners to go out there and to make it better. Do something. He wants us to question and to challenge and to grapple and to fight, and ultimately, He wants us to change this world. And He wants us to emerge stronger and better and more resilient and more faithful for it. So, we are indeed privileged, but we understand that privilege is not a luxury. It's a legacy. Like our parents and our grandparents before us, we should be proud of our Jewish privilege, as we hope and pray that our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren will be proud of theirs. We are what we are because of those who came before us. Our lives are not these disconnected fragments. We are each a letter in God's book of life. And although a single letter are each themselves vehicles of meaning, they really have little meaning unless we merge one letter with the next letter with the next letter. Because if I put a bunch of letters together, I get a word. And if I put a bunch of words together, I get a sentence. And if I put a bunch of sentences together, I get a paragraph. And if I put paragraphs together, I get a chapter. And if I put chapters together, I get a book. That's the story of who we are. We each have our letter. And we stand with our letter proud, but we merge it together with the next. For us to have true meaning as a people, for us to fulfill this mission given to us as a chosen people, as a privileged people, we have to join our letters together to tell our story to the world. We're all part of the oldest, most incredible story ever written. It's the story of a tiny people, never large, and often homeless. So much of our history, we were a homeless nation. Now, most of us in this room, maybe not, grew up with Israel being a fact of life. It wasn't that way. It wasn't that pre-1948. We were a homeless people. We went from country to country, from continent to continent. We didn't find a home so easily. And when we did, it lasted a decade, 2 decades, until some new Bible came and all Jews out. The Fiddler of the Roof story. You settle in, you make a shtetl, you think you're happy, and then out you go to the next part of the journey, to the next part of the journey. Think about it. Think about our history. How much of our history were we in Eretz Yisrael? Joshua took us in, the Babylonians threw us out, we went back after the story of Purim, and the Romans threw us out again. And for most of our existence, we are homeless people knocking on our door saying, let us back into our homeland. We, this generation, seize this homeland. We can visit this homeland. We can live in this homeland. This is the glorious part of our story. We join our letters together with every single Jew that was alive today, but also with all those that formed words and paragraphs and chapters of the prior thousands of years of our existence. And we tell the world our story. Started from the Egyptians, moving our way all the way through till today. Am Yisrael Chai. We tell the world we're still here. We're not going anywhere. And we will always be. We defeat death not by living forever. We don't live forever. But by living with values. And those values live forever. By doing deeds, by creating blessings that will live on after us, and by attaching ourselves in the midst of time to God who lives beyond time. May the Almighty grant us all the courage and the foresight to continue carrying the torch of our faith high, to continue wearing our privilege proudly, to seeing it pass our legacy to our children, to our grandchildren, who are the guarantors of our future. Amen. May God grant us the strength and the perseverance to rise above the difficulties, especially the difficulties that Eretz Yisrael faces today, and that we celebrate the bond of love that lends meaning and purpose to our lives. We should do so in good health, with peace of mind, with much nachas, with prosperity, with blessings for all of our families and for Israel and for all of mankind. Amen. Thank you all for joining me during the winter semester, and we look forward to having you for the spring semester after Passover. I'll take any questions in the room as soon as Jacob tells us we're okay.